the Journey. This is a conversation on leadership, culture, and theology. My name is Vidal, and I will be your host for today's conversation. And I'm here to tell you that I have a kind of a double excitement for the day and for this episode. And one of the reasons is because not only we're going to be talking about one of my favorite books in the Bible, which is the book of Ephesians, and I'll tell you a little bit more on that. But the other one is that we get to speak to one of my favorite pastors here in South Texas. Many of you guys know that we reside in deep South Texas, and I'm talking about my brother, Pastor Stephen Parker. Brother Parker, it's good to see you, and it's good to have you in our conversation. How are you today?
I'm very good, Vidal. It's so good to be with you. Thank you so much for having me here today.
Well, Pastor, we are here for a couple of reasons, and one of them is I love to catch up with you. You and I have known each other for a while now, and I was trying to remember, but you came to First Baptist West Laco back in 2000.
8.
Remind me.
Yes, 2008. Yes, sir.
2008.
Mhm.
So we came to South Texas. My family and I came back to South Texas just a little bit before you, which was 2004.
Okay.
And so our ministry is kind of chronologically speaking, they have moved
Right.
side to side. But I just want to officially introduce you to our podcast audience by reminding everybody that not only you've been at First Baptist since 2008, First Baptist West Laco, but we're talking about more than 30 years of pastoral ministry all together.
Yes,
And
sir.
then I know that you have devoted your life to helping people discover how the gospel, now this is huge, how the gospel shapes everyday life, not only Sunday worship. Now,
Yes.
today specifically, we are discussing, presenting, introducing, dissecting a little bit of a brand new experience for you and for us as a community of believers. And it's the release of your new book, Getting the Church Inside You, which is balancing faith and action. Now, on your description, we also found out that this is a pastoral exploration of the book of Ephesians. I mentioned that earlier, that this is one of my favorite books in the New Testament, and that you're inviting the readers to move beyond simply attending church and beginning living out their faith in daily life. Now, since the release of the book has appeared at the top of Amazon. Now, listen to this, new release and bestseller list in its category, and was also honored with the 2026 Christ-Lit Book Award, making it an official book of the year nominee. Pastor, congratulations
Thank
on
you.
the book. Thank
So
you.
humble.
Thank you. Well, let me just ask you, because it's one of the questions that I typically ask to our guests just right off the bat.
Mhm.
Just give us a brief, up to date, what is taking place in the household of the Parkers? What's going on with
Uh,
family?
I'm exhausted today just thinking about it, but no, things are going very well. Like you mentioned, we've served here at First Baptist since 2008 and just been blessed to serve a great church. My wife, Lisa, and I celebrated our 30th wedding anniversary back in December, and she's just been such a great helpmate, and it's cool to get to walk through life with your best friend, and we've been doing that for a long time, and we're really blessed. Our daughter Morgan, who's 25, our oldest, just got married this past Saturday, and anyone that's ever been through that knows that's quite an experience, but it was such a wonderful blessing. We had a service at church that was just surreal to get to officiate her wedding and work with my uncle to do that. That was a real special thing. And then I had a reception here with the whole church, and then a kind of an after party reception with our family back at our house, and just a great time. And we also have 3 sons who are 22, 16, and almost 14. And they worked so hard helping us get prepared for that wedding, and just really loved their sister, and poured themselves into the efforts of getting that done. And so it was just a really beautiful shared experience, and like nothing I've ever been a part of before. Just really special. It's been a really great time. Morgan and her husband Josh are actually on their honeymoon in Playa del Carmen, Mexico, and we texted with them a little bit earlier, and they're having a good time. So it's all good right now.
What a blessing. Now you are able to enjoy the labor of many
Yes.
years of investment. So doing the math and listening to the age of your kids, so
Mhm.
it almost sounds like First Baptist Westlaco has been their church or their primary church. I
Yes.
mean, for many years
So
now.
my oldest, Morgan, was in second grade when we moved to
Wow,
Westlaco, and
wow.
her second grade teacher is an active member of our church, and I actually baptized her a few years ago, which was pretty cool. And she and Morgan are now friends. They work together on the Rotary Club here in Westlaco, and so that's been neat to watch. Our son Nathan was 4 when we moved to Westlaco, and so he went through the whole Westlaco school system from kindergarten through graduating, and he's gone to UTRGV and is finishing up there now. And Casey and Micah have been born since we've been here, so they've never known any other church other than First Baptist Westlaco.
So you got Valley kids. That's the bottom
Valley
line.
kids, yes
That's
sir,
it.
yes sir.
That's it. That's it.
And my
Well,
wife and I are both Valley kids. We were both born at Valley Baptist Hospital in Harlingen, and I grew up in the First Baptist Church of Lyford, and she grew up in the First United Methodist Church of Edcouch, and just we're native.
that's amazing. That is amazing. What a wonderful thing. And to hear that ministry for you has been more than 30 years, and now to hear your background from both of you guys and also your kids. Um, I guess like anything else, things have changed so much and so rapidly in our culture that to speak of tenure in ministry again
Hmm.
is challenging. It's not as common as it used to be. And the other thing is that you guys, you just, I mean, this is very incarnational when it comes to the ministry. Now let me ask you about the book.
Hmm.
Through this whole journey, what is it that brought you into that place where you said, hey, I really feel led to write a book, and specifically in the book of Ephesians? What brought it, the actual birth of that book for you?
That's a great question, Vidal. So I felt called. I love to write, and have always loved to write, and obviously do a lot of writing in pastoral ministry in a variety of settings, writing sermons, writing correspondence, lessons, teaching. But I felt called for a long time to pursue some kind of publication. But to be completely honest, I think I was hesitant to move forward with it out of largely a fear of failure. And so I had what was I felt like was almost a completed manuscript sitting on my shelf for years, and just hadn't moved forward with it. I had kind of stalled out at the process of trying to figure out how to publish it. I didn't know how to do it, and just there it sat for quite a while. And then toward the end of 2023 and into 2024, I had some pretty significant health problems and nearly died a couple of times, and was really blessed to come through that. My family and our church family rallied around me, and I went through a long, slow recovery, and kind of came out on the other side. And as I was getting better and coming out, I began to really wrestle with that sense of calling of trying to get published again, and felt like if that was something that I sensed God calling me to do, I needed to move forward with it, because life is pretty fleeting, and I was reminded of that. Also, realizing that if fear of failure what was keeping me from doing it, one, that's a pretty inadequate reason to not do something, and two, I find myself encouraging my children to take risks and be willing to try things. Uh, and if I'm not willing to do that myself, I'm really not setting a very good example in that. And so I got really serious about this book last summer, and started largely just teaching myself the publishing process and figuring out how to write proposals, and what what publishers will take unsolicited manuscripts and which ones won't, and how to go about that process. And during that process, I got rejected by some of the better publishers in the U.S. and found a lot of people that didn't want my book. And then that's a whole thing too, to get more comfortable with rejection, and dealing with that. And then went through that whole process, and then found a couple that seemed pretty interested, and then locked in on one and signed a contract. And about 6 months later, we are with the book, and it's out.
It just sounds like it's reflecting a lot of your personal journey, and not
Mhm.
only just on the writing of the book, but just the story. Because I can see how many of these experiences overlap with pastoral ministry. Now, when it comes to the title of the book, why this title? When it comes to getting the church, inside of you, why are we looking at this title? Where did that come from?
So it's interesting. The book was really birthed during the season of the pandemic, and we were going through this time when we were displaced, and going through starts and stops and shutdowns and trying to figure out how to do church in new ways and doing online church and really having this experience of wanting to be together, but not being able to physically be together for long periods of time. And that really led to me feeling really drawn to the book of Ephesians and Paul's other prison epistles, because those really resonated with me during that season of reading about this apostle who wanted to be with the churches that he loved, but he was physically separated from them due to imprisonment. And then how he found ways to stay connected with them through his writing. And so really began to look into the book of Ephesians and just dive into it. And that was kind of a lifeline for me during that season. And so that gave rise to sermons that eventually gave rise to chapters that eventually became this book. The idea of getting the church inside you also really came through that time as we were starting to come out of the pandemic and asking, how do we get people back in church? We went through this season where we went from being totally organic to totally online, and people were worried, are people going to come back to church, and how are we going to facilitate that, and what's it going to look like? And somehow during that time, I began to lock on to a different question, which is not how are we going to get people back in church, but how are we going to get the church inside people? And how do we get people to embody the gospel message so that whether we're meeting in our building or displaced in some way, that message is the same and it's living with them and it's going everywhere that they go and it's transforming us from the inside out.
It seems to me that one of the tendencies that we all have is, and I don't know if this is human nature or not, but we eventually somehow shift things around, and what the Bible potentially describes as the beginning, we make it the end, and vice versa. So obviously, attending church is important, and many of our folks still attend church.
Right.
When it comes to the book, I guess one of the questions that I have is, how is that different, just simply attending church, to what you actually describe in the book?
Right. That's a good question. I think obviously I've been in church all my life, so attendance is important, and I'm grateful for getting to be in church. But I really also experienced this when I went through my own health problems of recovering from back surgery, and I couldn't be in church physically for a good period of time, and then being able to stay connected online, which was such a gift. But then also just realizing that having the church inside me is something other than physically being in the building, and that it is very possible to go and sit in church, but not to embody the message that's being shared there and embraced there, but instead just trying to encourage people to live a life that is just transformed by the gospel and embodies the gospel. And it's something that we carry with us, whether we're in a hospital or at home or a funeral home or cemetery or a ball game, that everywhere that we go, we are the church, and the gospel goes with us.
You explained a little bit at the beginning or earlier in our conversation one of the answers that you gave us, but I guess the question is, based on everything you described, the reason why you chose the book of Ephesians and things like that, how is it that Ephesians actually portrays this, or help us to understand the point that you just made? Why the book of Ephesians?
I love that idea of the prison epistles being these documents that Paul writes when he's socially distanced from these congregations, not by choice. And so he might want to be there with them and carry this message with him, but he can't. And so he finds a way to communicate with them through others by writing this down and then sending it with a trusted messenger. And it's a way to stay connected and to encourage them not to quit on the gospel message, even though he can't be there with them. And so it's a way to pastor them from a great distance. And so I just think it's a really beautiful concept, and one that we need to find ways to repeat, that sometimes we can be together and sometimes we can't, but we can always have the church inside us, and we can find ways to stay connected using whatever means are around us to build fellowship.
It seems to me that when we are not physically connected, and you reminded us of the pandemic, which was one crucial point for what I'm hearing, and also your health issues, what is going to bring to the surface moments that we're going through, again, separation or limitations on physical fellowship and community as churches, is going to bring to the surface precisely the actual understanding of what church is. And right. This past Sunday, I got the privilege to preach at one of the churches in Brownsville, and I preached from a very similar or parallel book, which to Ephesians, which is Colossians,
Mhm.
and they actually share the same outline. And one of the things that Paul said to the church in Colossians chapter 2 is precisely that even though I'm not with you physically, I am with you in the spirit.
Mhm.
And I mean that you're just bringing that conversation full circle for me, because that's
And that's
exactly
great.
what you're describing.
That's a great comparison, because Colossians is probably written at the exact same time that Ephesians is written, and it's sent with the same messenger. And so Ephesians is kind of Paul's generic sermon that he writes that can be circulated among many congregations there in Asia Minor. And then Colossians is that boiled down to an even shorter message for a specific church. And so it's really a cool thing. In Ephesians, it's almost like Paul took the doctrines of Romans and
Mhm.
figured out a way to write a short excerpt on it. And kind of the Ephesians is kind of the Cliff Notes version of Romans in some ways, and he's able to send those out during that time. And then Colossians again is kind of the same thing, but written to a very specific group of believers.
Yeah, I see Ephesians sometimes, and you're reminding me as some sort of a capstone of
Mm-hmm.
Paul's theology. Kind of a
Mm-hmm.
bringing it to a conclusion. This is part of that prison letter components. But again, it seems to me that these are occasional letters. Something is going on in these places, in these churches, and part of that
Mm-hmm.
is obviously the difficulties that they're facing, whether it's false teachers or whatever other internal things might be happening. How is it that you see or saw in the writing of the book and choosing Ephesians that Paul actually helps us today, and to them and also to us, to understand the balance
Mm-hmm.
between faith and daily living?
Paul is such a genius in how he organizes his material. He maybe is the greatest scholar of all time, and just the way he organizes this and writes it so well is just amazing. I told somebody recently, if you have a choice between reading my book and reading Ephesians, forget about my book, just read Ephesians. It's fantastic. It's fantastic. But hopefully, my book echoes that message for a new age. But what Paul did, I cannot improve upon. And in the first three books, the first three chapters of the book of Ephesians, he gives us these soaring theological truths, these important principles of the gospel, these things about who God is and who we are in the light of who God is and what Christ has done and what that means for faith. And it's just these wonderful truths. And at several points, he breaks out into prayer and doxology because the truths are so soaring and so beautiful and wonderful. It's beyond what he can contain in his imprisonment state. He just breaks into praise. And then he gets to chapter 4, and in chapter 4, verse 1, he challenges us to walk in a manner worthy of the calling that we've received. And in that word, English word worthy, it represents the Greek word axios, which is this wonderful term that refers to a balancing scale, where on one side, maybe you have a pound of flour, and then on the other side, you have to put a pound of something else to bring that scale into equilibrium or balance. And so then everything that follows Ephesians 4:1, it are these practical living things about how we live in our church, how we grow in our faith, how we interact as families, how we interact in the workplace, how we practice spiritual warfare, how we live in the world, how we pray and grow in fellowship. And so you have on the one side of this balancing scale these soaring truths of the gospel, and then literally on the other side of the balancing scale you have these uh, wonderful life rules of how we practice our faith and how we live out our faith in the real world. And Paul brings those things into balance there, where if we believe these things, then we'll live in this way, and if we live in this way, then it shows that we believe these things. And if one part of that is not in balance, then the whole thing is off kilter.
So would you also say, because you reminded me that unbalanced Christianity or unbalanced church life and just life in general, given the benefit of the doubt to the folks,
Mm-hmm.
in this case in Ephesus, and given the benefit of the doubt to our churches today, would you say that unbalanced life many times happens through blind spots? In
Mm-hmm.
other words, I don't think the church wants to be or the Christian wants to be unbalanced, but it's just life. It happens. It's a
Right.
broken world. We're still in the process. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
asking this question because um, it seems to me that again, chapter 4, verse 1. But even if you go further, I'm thinking verse 10, all the way through verse 10, which is to me kind of the epicenter of the letter. Um, Paul helps us to see the importance, and this is the question that I have for you. Why is it that it's important for Christians to to be aware that the unbalance happens to everybody, and that this balance is reflected on between doctrine and discipleship? Why does that matter? Discipleship and doctrine.
Yeah, I think it's so important to bring those things into balance, and it's kind of something that we always hold in check. In one of the chapters of the book, I talk about ones and fives, and that's a phrase that we use here in our office because of an old evaluation form that we used to use during staff evaluation time, when fives were the top of the score and ones were at the bottom of the score. And one of the things we talk to people about is how in all of life, you can't be all fives, and you're probably not going to be all ones. And so you might be all fives at work and then find that you're ones at home, and that those, even just our performance, those things have to come into balance. And so realizing, I guess, as we evaluate our lives and think about our faith, when we see those things out of balance, that just shows us ways in which the other side of the scale needs to be adjusted. And so we see, hey, maybe I'm not living in this way the way I should. And then we can sometimes look to the other side of the scale and say, well, maybe I'm not worshiping the way I should, or maybe I'm not reading my Bible the way that I should. Maybe I'm not praying the way that I should, or hey, I am worshiping and I'm reading my Bible and I'm praying, but I notice I'm not treating my family the way I should. Let me adjust that. And so it's this constant work toward equilibrium. Another way to think about it would be maybe a tightrope walker. How if you're watching from a distance, they appear to be just gliding along effortlessly, if I can say that right. But if you zero in on what they're doing, there's constant adjustment. There's a shift of weight. There's a movement of their foot. It's a constant work to stay in balance there. And so I think in our lives of faith, it's like that. From someone looking from the outside in might think, oh, they have it all together. But man, if they could see inside, they know that we're constantly making adjustments and little things here and there, changing how we practice and how we live. Another balance thing that Paul talks about in Ephesians is speaking the truth in love. And we get that all out of whack in the way we relate, the way we function in our society. And we, I think, have all known people who were heavy on truth or doctrine and light on love. And you meet some pretty unhappy people that way and encounter some pretty unhappy, pretty unsatisfied families. But then the flip side of that is we know people who maybe are trying to be big on love, but they're not real big on truth. And I think then you get into some things like activism that really isn't grounded in anything that's deeper than what's going to last tomorrow, or just some kind of fluffy theology that's not really going to stand the test of time. And so finding those balances where we are grounded in the eternal truths of the gospel, but because we're grounded in the eternal truths of the gospel, we live in love and practice kindness and grace and all these things that are such an important part of our life of faith.
I think you're a good reminder, everything you just explained based on those verses from chapter 4, that our tendency as Westerners, 21st century, on this side of the world, which is not where and how the Bible was written from the human component, is that we're linear thinkers. And our tendency is to see either or. And it seems to me that what you're describing or reminding us is that it's a both and, in a sense of discipleship, in a sense of doctrine. It's not an either or, it's a both and. And when you spoke of truth in love, I was reminded also that, this July we'll be celebrating, and we're right behind you guys, 29 years of marriage. And I can tell you, as a fellow struggler, that in several occasions, maybe many occasions, I have to make a choice within my reasoning whether I want to be right or I want to be married.
Right, right.
Yeah. I just got to be careful. And it's the same thing. I don't think we're negotiating the gospel, but it's how you convey this gospel presentation. Hey, so at the very beginning, and it was intentional, I asked you about your, snapshot of family life and what's taking place, and you gave us some very important, crucial scenarios of what's taking place in life. Um, it seems to me that the balance component is a communal experience, because you're
Hmm.
right after chapter 4, he moves right into the whole community, right?
Hmm.
I mean, it's the whole deal that these churches are very diverse. They're made of multiple, backgrounds and experiences.
Hmm.
And that's the classical passage that goes into in chapter 5, that he speaks of the mutual submission, and then he speaks of, masters and a slaves relationship, and then
Hmm.
moves into children and parents. So it's the communal part. So you are you're a pastor. We are pastors.
Hmm.
And one of the things that we appreciate about your book is that it has stories.
Hmm.
And when you're in ministry, when you are, in community, you got plenty of stories. Is there any story that you want to share with us or reminds us that really calls your attention within the narrative of the book?
So there's a lot of favorites in it, and a lot. This is a lot of us, our family story, our family experience, our church life, and one that really jumped out at me as I was sitting here and it's detailed in the book. I won't read it, but it's a story from when we were serving at First Baptist Cotulla, a little bit north of here. And my son Nathan was little; he wasn't in school yet, and my wife was watching him off our back porch, watching him play in the backyard, and he loved sports, and he would go through these whole scenarios where he would be in the Super Bowl, and he would throw the pass, and then he would catch it, and he would run in for the score, and he would also narrate his own touchdown. So he was the commentator, the player, the quarterback, the receiver, the whole thing, the coach, all of it. And in this one instance, he tosses himself the ball. He catches it. He runs in toward the end zone. He dives in for the winning score. And he says, Nathan Rodriguez scores the winning touchdown. And of course, his last name is Parker, and he was raised by two Anglo parents there, and but very much identified with the Rodriguez family. Noe and Judy Rodriguez, who were our music minister and his wife there at our church in Cotulla, and they had a son, Noe Jr., who was a handful of years older than Nathan and a very talented athlete, and he looked up to him. And so for him, the greatest honor would be to carry that Rodriguez name and be an athlete like that. And I talked to Noe Rodriguez recently, who called to check in. And before we got off the phone, he asked, "How's my sobrino Nathan doing?" And it dawned on me, Noe sees himself as my brother, and so then that makes Nathan his nephew. And just thinking through that story, I love that we've raised children in a place and in a way that they embrace their sisters and brothers in Christ in that way, and they're not so divided along cultural lines as so many outside of our churches and in our communities are, but just are able to love like that and to embrace one another and be sisters and brothers in Christ across all of our diverse landscape, and that's just a real blessed experience, and I'm just real honored to see that in my kids coming out like that.
You and I know this by experience, because we have lived long enough in this world that what you just described, the Bible presented as normative. The
Right,
churches, we're a family and we're supposed to do that. But in reality,
right.
those ideals have to be brought into real experiences. So I guess for me, going back to just your experience as a pastor, as a father, as a husband, how have you seen people's lives change when the church becomes something they carry inside them?
Mm, that's a great question. I've been so blessed as a pastor. I'm sitting here in my office, and one of the stories in the book talks about a young woman who was addicted to heroin, who came into my office, and she was trying to get off of the heroin and going through terrible withdrawal symptoms. And she described how her withdrawal was so bad that her skin hurt where the couch was pressing against it. It was that intense. And then now you fast forward to now where she's a single mother. She's raising kids. She loves the Lord. She's serving. She's been clean and sober for a long time, not without struggles like all of us, but uh, God did a transforming work in her life through Christ, and it's been amazing to watch. I share another story of a woman who was struggling with a great sense of guilt over an abortion she had had when she was much younger, and the opportunity of getting to watch the forgiveness of God through Christ rain down in her life and just be transformational, and how God has blessed their family in so many ways. Other simple ways are watching a husband and wife who used to really be at odds with each other and were maybe headed toward divorce, and now getting to see them speak sweetly to each other and embrace one another in love and compassion and grace. And that's a maybe not quite as dramatic an example, but so beautiful nonetheless. And there's just countless stories like that. We'd like to see more. You would hope that everybody that you come into contact with experiences the transforming love of Christ in that way. But it's such a blessing when we get to be in the room when those things happen. And they do happen, and the gospel is real, and it makes such a huge difference in stories. And what a blessing.
You and I have been in ministry for a while now, a couple of decades, and privileged to be married and have children. And you and I have seen also experiences where people have disconnected from church for whatever reasons.
Mhm.
But also, one of the difficult things to see, and no pastor is exempt or immune from potentially disconnecting from church as well, or ministry. So, thinking through the lenses of those who have been but are now disconnected,
Mhm.
again, for whatever reason, in every case, I will assume is different. Um, how would you? What type of encouragement would you give them?
Yes, I hope that this book might be a resource of drawing people back into the faith, drawing people back into the community of faith. Uh, it's a reminder that we are flawed and imperfect in so many ways. And when we find the perfect church, they're not going to let any of us in because we're so flawed and imperfect. But that somehow there's beauty in it, the way God works through this imperfect community of faith, bunch of sinners who are saved by grace and learning how to live like it and what that looks like. And then somehow through that, God's Spirit works, and it can be a beautiful thing. And that there are opportunities for reconciliation and restoration and new beginnings. And that I hope people, maybe through this book, might be willing to put their toe back in that water and give that another try, because the idea of an individualistic faith that is so common in the West is just completely foreign to the world of the New Testament. And the New Testament calls us to this communal expression of faith. I titled the book "Getting the Church Inside You," but really it probably should have been titled "Getting the Church Inside Y'all,"
Mm.
because the Greek word that Paul uses for you throughout the book is plural. And so when Paul addresses all these important truths and these important issues and these important things that ought to impact how we live, he's almost exclusively talking to the community of faith and assuming that believers are going to be part of an active community where they're serving and worshiping and working together for the good of the kingdom.
And obviously, again, we can go case by case where people either have left the church. Um, One of the responsibilities that you and I have as parents and have had since we became parents was precisely the understanding that if our kids were to ever walk away from the faith, which we hope never happens, we want to make sure that they walk away from the real Jesus and not a
Right.
mockery or a caricature of Jesus.
Right.
And I feel that sometimes people have left not necessarily the gospel
Mhm.
or the church, but a counterfeit experience
Mhm.
of that concept of gospel or church. So in this case, I guess part of my question now, because I want to flip it from people who have departed now to the church
Mhm.
to become or recapture or reconnect and
Mhm.
become more attractive to people, and especially those who have left the faith. What do you feel or think are the things that the church needs to rediscover today?
I think if we live out these great truths of the gospel, if we live as people who are embracing God's eternal mission, the mystery that God intended to make one family out of a diverse world, and we live speaking the truth in love, and we live in the grace and peace of Jesus instead of acting as though our faith is about something that we do or a performance that we make. If we live as though God's grace and peace through Jesus Christ really is enough, then I think that's very inviting to a thirsty world who's longing to drink living water. And I hope that this will be a lifeline to people that maybe have wandered away from the church, and also an encouragement to churches to be what we're called to be, and to function as this grace-filled place where Christ reigns, and the same grace that God extends to us, we extend to others. And instead of beating ourselves up for the ways in which we're imperfect, that we live into the grace of God that says in Christ we really are enough, and what he has done for us is what our faith is all about.
You know, you remind me also that we're so prompt and we're so immersed into this preconceived idea that when you do go to the Bible or you go to church, you're so quick. We are so quick to get all these mandates and imperatives on how to do X, Y, and Z and how to fix those things. And obviously, the Bible does provide instruction for those things. But we got to be reminded that these churches, specifically the church in Ephesus, Colossae, all these churches in the New Testament, they were struggling churches. I mean, we typically romanticize a lot of this, but they were going through very, very challenging experiences themselves. And the other thing that we got to be reminded is this is a prison letter. So Paul is not writing from a pastor's conference or the ideal experience. Persecution is coming rather quick to them, oppression, and all this opposition. But for anyone in our culture, in today's environment, that were to read this book, your book, what do you hope for our folks to actually experience? What type of change in their life would you like to see happening?
Well, I hope that we could come to see ourselves as what God sees us as, which is saints. That's the word that Paul uses for believers throughout this letter, and that idea that saints are not some perfect person who's performed some kind of miracle, but rather saints are your run of the mill, ordinary Christians who have lapses of faith and get it right and get it wrong all the time, and are figuring out how to follow Jesus by faith day by day, even though they get it wrong in a lot of ways. And I hope we could come to live into that status and see our identity as people who've been redeemed by Jesus, and that it's not, again, about some kind of performance that we make. We ought to live morally upright lives, but even if we live the most morally upright life that we can, our faith is because of what Jesus has done for us, and to live into that and embrace that, to be God's workmanship. I love that word where he talks about salvation by grace through faith, and not of ourselves, of our works, that none of us can boast, but then that we ourselves are God's workmanship. And the Greek word is poema, which is the word from which we get our English word poem, that we are God's masterpiece. We are God's artistic expression, that his fingerprints of redemption are all over our story, and that we really can live that out. What a great status to be in as children of faith, as followers of Christ, as disciples, as saints, as co-heirs of the promises of God. It's just such a great status that we have because of what Jesus has done for us.
Amen. What a great message. And this is a reminder also that Paul, whether it's Paul writing to these churches or just what you just said, how God sees us and who we are before him, this has to do with the real church, not the ideal church.
Right.
I get to serve through the ministry of church revitalization and church health. And in church revitalization, we speak of the pastor loving and shepherding the real church, not the church that he wishes he could have.
Mhm.
And I think this is a good reminder. Pastor, let me just, as we close our time together today, I want to thank you for the opportunity to talk about, not only with you, but also speak about this amazing, amazing opportunity to really recapture the essence of gospel experience in community. But if anybody were to not just read the book, but also actually get some traction personally, what are some of maybe one practical step that someone that is listening, watching this video, this podcast, can take this week to actually begin living the message of Ephesians, the message of your book?
I think of two things that someone could do somewhat simultaneously. The first maybe would be, Paul talks a lot about prayer in the book of Ephesians, sometimes himself even breaking into prayer and praise as he writes. And I think if someone is reading this and wanting to begin to embody the gospel, begin to take prayer more seriously. Pray before you get out of bed in the morning. Pray when you go back to bed at night, and pray over the course of your day. Just little moments to talk to God as though you're talking with a friend, and express yourself to God and listen for God's voice as you pray. I think that's a great way to start to begin to embody the gospel message. The other thing I thought of as you asked that question is to begin to grow in community from no matter what point you find yourself encountering this book. Think of a Christian brother or sister that maybe you haven't engaged with in a while or haven't spent much time with, and invite them out for a cup of coffee. Go and grab a hamburger together and just spend some time in fellowship with no agenda, just time to go and be Christian people together, friends in faith, and see where that goes. Those are two very simple things that you can do. Anybody can do those things. You don't have to have a seminary degree to go to McDonald's together or go by the Daily Grind here in Weslaco and grab a cup of coffee. And any of us can cry out to God and speak to God like he's our friend, and he indeed is. He's the greatest friend we'll ever find. And I think if we'll start doing that, then we might just find the gospel getting inside us in a deep way, and might find that we're embodying the message of the church more than just going to church.
Amen. Amen. The name of the book is Getting the Church Inside You, Balancing Faith and Action. As we close our time together, I have to ask you this question because I'm hoping that the appetite has been awakened for our listeners, for the viewers of the podcast. And the question is, where can they actually find the book? And second question connected, where can they learn more about your ministry?
Yes, thank you, Vidal. From your lips to God's ears. I hope that people's appetites are whet, and I hope that they get this book, and I hope that it draws them a little closer to Jesus in their walk of faith, and hopefully a little deeper into their community of faith, whatever that is. This book can be found anywhere, at any major book retailer. It's available at Amazon.com. It's available at Barnes & Noble. It's available at Walmart.com. It's also available directly from the publisher at Charis Publishing. But basically, wherever you buy books, you can get this book. If you want to know more about our ministry, of course, you can go to our church website at fbcweslaco.org. And we're in the middle of a launch series for the book. And so there are sermons that kind of run parallel to the chapters of the book that are going on right now. But also, I have my own author website at drstephenparker.com. And I have a Facebook page at Pastor Stephen Parker. And so you can follow me there and find some devotional content and a blog and some things related to the book. There is also on my website a resources page. And on that resources page at drstephenparker.com, there are video chapter introductions and study guides for each chapter, and materials that can be utilized if someone wanted to, one, just study the book themselves and go a little deeper, but even more than that, if they want to study this book with a group of friends or as a church-wide study. We have a women's group and our youth group right now are going through the book in our church and utilizing those resources. And so those are available on my website to anyone, whether you buy the book or not, but they're also designed to go a little further than what the book does, so that if you have the book and you have those resources, you could really do a full study experience in your church or within your small group Bible study.
As you are, and many of you have stayed with us to the end of the podcast, one of the things that we would love for you to do is not only visit the website, drstephenparker.com, but the other one is go ahead and subscribe to any of the social media channels mentioned. And by the way, we'll put those links on the show notes. Right. So you guys can just go to the description of the podcast and you get access to it. But the other thing is that speak to us briefly about getting reviews on Amazon. I know that's helpful for the book. I mean, it's a brand new book, and it reminds us, how does that work?
Yes, it's so helpful for new authors, which I am. This is my first book. And it's so helpful if people will go and get the book on Amazon and then review the book on Amazon. And it takes a few days within the Amazon system for those to post, because they verify that you purchased the book and that you're a real person and not a bot and all those things. So it's a little bit of a slow process, but it's so helpful to new authors because all of that is driven by an algorithm that's way smarter than what I can understand. But if people will go and purchase and write reviews, it helps drive this book up on the algorithm to where somebody in another country or somebody in another part of the U.S., when they put in Ephesians or church or anything like that, it'll help bring my book up a little higher on the list. And then hopefully this message of getting the church inside you will break out of the Rio Grande Valley and out of Texas and get out to where people need it, and people can receive it, which I think is across the world, where we all need to remember who we are in Christ and what that means for how we live our lives of faith.
The title of the book has to do with balancing faith and action. And I said it earlier, I believe every Christian eventually lives an unbalanced experience. That's why community is so non-negotiable, is necessary. Right. So please get a copy of the book, bring it into the conversation with your friends and family. And for pastors, this is a great way for us to look at and dissect the big picture of Ephesians, obviously, but specifically when it comes to helping believers to balance the reality of not only trusting Jesus, but also the meaning of what that actually entails in daily life. Pastor, as always, grateful to see you and to talk to you. Thank you for everything you do. Thank you for your tenure at First Weslaco. It's good to celebrate, and I have been privileged to be close to your church. I know I know all of your staff in there, actually. Mm-hmm. And I've been friends with many of them for years. And it's good to see what God has done. Any final word before we close today?
Vidal, it's been my blessing to be with you. And for those who might be listening and might be interested in some of those resources, they can also shoot me an email at pastor@drstephenparker.com. And if you have any questions about the resources that are there, how to utilize those in your church, I'm available, and I'd love to visit about this. And I just hope that this message is encouraging to people, to encourage them in their faith, to draw them a little closer to Jesus and a little closer to each other.
Getting the church inside you, balancing faith and action with drstephenparker.com. That's the website. And we will see you guys next time. God bless.
Thank you, Vidal.